everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing a little bit of a photorealism watercolor of this heron on the Misty Lake. And first want to just kind of point out a couple of things. The horizon line, when I first taught this class, a couple people were understandably mistaking the horizon line as that little island that the heron is on, but it's actually a little bit above it. You can kind of see where the trees in the background meet. That is going to be your horizon line. So I encouraged my students in this class to kind of mark a little line there just so that they had this visual of where the horizon line is. And it did help them throughout the painting just kind of keep in mind where those colors meet instead of automatically, because your brain just sees this dark black island that the heron is on, and it's just understandable that your brain's like, oh, that's horizon line, especially when you're not really paying attention, you're focused on mixing colors. So that was my first suggestion, is just to put a horizon line there and the colors just lightly so your paint can go right over it. And this is one where the muddiness is going to help in the situation. So, I know they always say in watercolor you want to avoid mudding the colors, but sometimes it works. And this is just one of those instances that I think it works for the painting. And it's going to be constantly layering in colors. And of course, you don't want to go too dark where it becomes too muddy and you lose the effect. So we're starting with a really light wash of colors, and I like doing the backgrounds in this light wash and also keeping my brush stroke in a circular motion. One of the things I've noticed over the years teaching my classes is, and it's one of those things that should have dawned on me earlier, and it just didn't. It didn't occur to me until, oh gosh, I don't know how many hundreds of classes in, which is pretty sad for me, but it was the circular motion of the brush. I think this is just one of those things that I had to stare at people like, why do I keep seeing their brush strokes in their paintings? And I kept adjusting the water and the paint and the wet on wet and all of these different techniques. And I finally realized, just kind of, like I said, I'm not the sharpest tool in the box, but I finally realized that it's this motion of the brush strokes. Of just doing that circular motion. It just it helps blend better, in my opinion. And sure enough, when I had a couple of regulars so I've taught this Heron class twice in two different locations. And one of the things I love that I teach when I teach these in person first and then bring it to you guys is I get to see what some of the beginners are struggling with and adjust it to my YouTube. And this is one of those instances where one of my regulars, and she's actually in my Golden Brush Club, which is people who've taken over 50 of my in-person classes. I know, it sounds insane. So she's taken over 50 of my classes. And I don't have too many people in there. I do have a few people in there, but not that many. And she's obviously taken enough classes to know the things that I say, and she's like, that circular motion thing really just kind of made a huge difference for me. And I've noticed that I've had such an easier time blending, and I felt kind of bad. I was like, wow, I should have really shared that with you a long time ago, but better late than never, right? So circular motion, it really is key. I spent a while talking about this just because it did seem to make such a huge difference. And just from the first to the second class I taught this in, because the first time I taught this, I didn't talk about the circular motion, and the second time I did, and the paintings made a huge difference. So do the circular motion. See how you feel about it. Of course, if it doesn't work, don't do it. I always tell people, do what works for you. I am not somebody who creates or follows the rules in watercolor. There's certain rules that I support, and I understand why they're there, but I also understand that for a lot of people, this is something you do for pleasure, and whatever gets the results you want to get is what's important. So I'm doing this light motion, light circular motion, and keeping the paint in a light wash because we want to be able to layer it in, and of course we want to create this nice foggy look. The first time I did this, I liked my colors a lot better, and the reason being is because if you see in the top left-hand corner of my painting, there's a little moon-like spot there. I kept dripping water onto my painting, and it I kept having to add paint to cover that up, and it just ended up getting almost too muddy for me. But I like the way they both came out. I'm happy with it. I just like the colors in my first one better than my second one. But there's a lot of things I like better in my second one, which was the branches and stuff like that. So you're pretty much covering the entire background, and you want to avoid the heron because we want to keep that, even though it looks dark in the photo, we want to be able to keep that light. Because if you look up close, the heron is almost like a really, 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 really pale Payne's gray. And we don't want that brown to be in there because that brown is just going to kind of muddy the color of the Payne's gray. So right now I have started to mix in a little bit of Payne's gray into my brown. So I'm using the raw sienna, the sepia, a lot of beige, and right now I'm just adding kind of a Payne's gray wash to it because, as you can see, when you first look at this, it does have a sepia feel to it. But as you keep going, you notice it has a little bit of that bluish gray tone. So that's where that Payne's gray comes in. And now you can see I've covered up that left-hand corner. And you kind of see this little rabbit hole I'm going down because it's already a lot darker than I want it to be. But it's okay. It works out. So I have a tree trunk in the middle. I didn't wait for it to dry. And so I lifted as much as I could and then really waited for it to dry. So ignore the tree trunk in the middle because I'm going to redo that later. It was just starting to bleed, so I stopped it, and then I was like, okay, I've got to actually follow the directions I give people and actually let it dry. So now I am doing the tree on the right, obviously. Like, wow, thanks, Tina. And the key is that I've waited for this to dry. So as I'm putting this tree trunk in, it is black. And I'm going to do this kind of a cool feathering technique to get these really, really thin branches in there. And the way to do that is I support my hand. You can see I have like my pinky underneath my hand here. And I'm just supporting my hand and doing this really, really, really quick motion with the branches. And that's the key, is that it has to be really, really quick. If you try to do it slowly, one, the branches will end up thicker, but also it's going to just take an inordinate amount of time to do that. But also, the effect works much better if you do it quickly. I don't know why, it just does. And so you just do this really, really quick feathering motion back and forth, where your brush is just barely touching the paper, just so you get that really, really thin line. And I just kind of support my hand with my pinky. I'm supporting that weight there so I can keep it going straight. And I'm also holding my paper down because it's starting to curl a little bit. And that's one of the things one of my students, one of my regulars, just recently asked me. She said, what is this with the stretching the paper? Because I don't teach it. So, and I know she's in a couple watercolor groups on Facebook, which is where they talk about those things. And she's like, what's with the stretching? Why aren't you teaching us this? It's just one of those things, there's watercolorists who swear by it and do it all the time. And then there's those like me that have just never done it. I will defer to a watercolor block instead. I think it's much more effective than trying to stretch it. And it's probably just your user error. I've tried stretching paper before and following YouTube channels, and it's just never really been effective for me. It's like, wow, this is a lot of work for very little result. Again, probably user error. But if I don't know how to do something, I'm not going to teach it. It just doesn't make sense for me to do that. And so I end up doing things like holding my paper down because it's starting to curl, and that works for me. So if you're somebody who has learned how to stretch paper and it works for you, then keep doing it. And again, that goes back to my thing of whatever works for you, keep doing. And I assume that not everything I do is going to work for others. It's one teacher's way of showing how to do something, and you take it and you roll with it, right? But and I always encourage my students, especially those who take my in-person classes, to try other watercolor instructors, and you might learn something completely different. It also kind of stretches those muscles, especially if you're one that takes regular classes with me. It's just one of those things. So now you can see how the feathering is kind of filling in with this tree and creating that effect. And I just think it's kind of it's a cool little effect. So this is just one of those things that I think when people see the finished painting, they're like, oh my gosh, look how thin those brush strokes are, how thin those branches are. How did you do that? And it's one of those things that once you figure out how to do it, it is a lot easier than it looks on paper. So if you're doing this in real time, my suggestion is to practice this motion first, because it takes a little bit of just creating that habit of how to get your hand to do this. But I also, when I was teaching this class, started with this tree on the right because it's darker. And that way, if it didn't quite look right, you have some room to go over it and redo it. The other thing to keep in mind with this tree, this is another thing that I observed when I was teaching it, is your tree branches go in a lot of different directions. They never go up and only up. That was one of the things that I noticed with my students. It's the ones that you just kind of start doing the tree branches and they all kind of go in the same direction. I have the benefit of literally staring out my window right now and seeing several giant maple trees in front of my art studio. Gorgeous trees, by the way, but the branches do go in all sorts of different directions. They generally go up and out, but they don't all go up and out in the exact same direction. So you don't want them to be uniform. That's what makes them look a little bit more organic on your paper, is making sure that the branches do go in different directions. So if you can see my painting, I did keep them going into different directions. So now I am doing this tree in the background, and I'm using beige because it's further in the distance, so it's kind of hidden by the fog a little bit. In hindsight, I probably would have just used the raw sienna instead for this one instead of the beige. But that's hindsight for you, right? You're looking, you're like, yeah, that's a little bit darker than I wanted. So if I were doing this yet again, a third time, I would probably do this in raw sienna instead to keep that color a little bit more natural. And I've had, this class was really fun for me because, especially the first one, it was a bigger class. It was like, I want to say over 10 students. And my workshops, I tend to keep a little bit smaller. So, I usually keep them under 10. They tend to be about between 5 and 8 students. But it was a little bit larger. So it was like 10 to, maybe more, 12 to 13 students in this class. And they were all very different looking. It was very cool. One of the students did hers in all shades of blue, and it was very pretty. And another one did the background just like this, but then she did really bold brush strokes for the heron, and it just looked like almost like a tapestry. It was very pretty. If you go to my Facebook page, we are currently early August. I want to say it was the third week of July. I posted this on my Facebook. So if you are watching this and you want to see the paintings, I did post the pictures of people that painted that. You'll get to see. They were very cool looking, and it's just very different. So everybody did these very differently. And it's one of those things when it comes to this kind of artwork where you've got this really soft wash in the background, everybody's just going to turn out very different. And my two paintings came out very different from each other too. Of course, there's more similar than some of the other people's compared to mine because it's just me painting the same thing over and over again. But it's one of the cool things. Don't expect your painting to look like mine. Don't expect it to look like the photo. Don't expect it to look like anybody else's. It's going to be your own. This is especially the case for this. So I'm just going to continue on with this background and fill it in, just kind of getting all the different sections in there. So just going to speed through that, but I just want to show you over here, me fixing this tree trunk that I mentioned earlier that I kind of did too prematurely and it started to bleed. So now I am going back over and just redoing it. It is going to end up a little bit fatter than I originally intended because I'm trying to cover up some of the bleed marks on there, but I just thought it was a kind of a nice opportunity to show you when I fix something that's, I was going to say broken, when I fix something that I originally messed up, just to kind of show you how I go back in and refix it. A lot of that's trust. What I've noticed also is when I see people make a mistake like I did, where you didn't wait for it to dry, or you did the wrong, whatever it is, the wrong color or something, they try to fix it right then and there, instead of just giving it the time it needs. And I get that because it's bothering you as you're finishing the painting. You're like, this thing is, I can see this from the corner of my eye and it keeps bothering me. But it's one of those things that you just kind of have to push through and ignore. You need to ignore it until it's ready to be fixed. And a lot of times, it's not that you're waiting for it to dry. A lot of times it's just giving yourself that mental space from that mistake you made to step away from it and see it again. So anytime you have something that you're trying to correct on your painting, way more so with watercolor than any other medium, really don't really fight the urge to try to fix it right then and there, regardless of what that is. It's going to bug the heck out of you. I've seen it happen so many times, but you're going to end up kind of digging yourself a grave in watercolor because you need that space to be able to just mentally take a break from it and just kind of reapproach it later once it's dried, once it's fixed. Obviously, if it's something that requires that immediate time, that's a little bit different, but I really encourage you to take a break from it. All right, so now we're jumping ahead to the reflection. So a couple of things I want to point out for the reflection. One of the things I did is, as you can see in the reflection of the original photo, you can see it's a very still lake, but there are little slight ripples in the water. And the way I did that is I take a clean, wet brush after I'm doing the shadowing, and I just drag my brush, the very tip of it, across that water horizontally, to kind of pull that paint from the reflection that I painted. And then I take my paper towel and I press down on it to lift up that color. So what happens is it's literally pulling the water reflection from the original paint you did, and it just looks more natural. So you can see your reflection that you painted actually turning into the ripple. I don't know if that makes sense. I know visually it's probably a little bit easier to see what I'm talking about, but yeah, you want to use a clean, wet brush to do that, and it just creates this really cool, soft ripple effect that you can then look at and say, oh, that's definitely water. So it's like when you're painting, this really soft water look, it helps with that. All right, so now we're just going to fly through this background here because it's pretty much me just repeating the same steps over and over again. So we're just going to take the time to fly through this, and if you're painting in real time, obviously you might need to pause this because I am speeding through. This is in a very fast mode. I wish I could paint this fast. I paint pretty fast as it is, but I would be able to do a lot more. So go ahead and enjoy the rest of the video. There isn't really much else going on here that I haven't really explained. So I'm just going to check myself out, stop talking your ear off, and just let you enjoy the rest of the painting.
and the leaves roll by your face. When the fireflies have run away too high and the moonlight falls from grace. You're on your own, 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 you're on your own. When your tongue ties and the dirt won't grow and the bread has lost its taste. When the magic's gone from dusk till dawn